The explosion in Maiduguri was loud, but what followed in Yobe was quieter and far more dangerous. Because this time no walls collapsed, no smoke rose into the sky. Instead, a man spoke. Authorities announced an arrest, a name, a face, a victory headline. But listen carefully, this wasn't just a suspect being paraded, this was a story being shaped. Behind closed doors, questions began to surface, not shouted, whispered. Who was he really? Why now? And why did the answers feel incomplete? Security officials described him as a link, a connector, someone who knew things. That phrase alone changed everything, because knowing things in a war like this can be more powerful than carrying a weapon. According to investigators, the suspect didn't resist. He talked, not immediately. At first, fragments, locations without names, names without faces. Then something shifted. A detail slipped out, one that didn't match the official timeline. A date that came before Maiduguri, a meeting that happened elsewhere. A plan discussed long before Christmas Eve. That's when the room went quiet. Because if that detail was true, then the bombing wasn't spontaneous. It wasn't rushed. It was part of something already in motion. And this man was not at the center. He was closer to the edge. The confession didn't explode all at once. It unfolded, layer by layer. He spoke of instructions passed through intermediaries, of voices he never met in person, of routes mapped across state lines. This wasn't chaos. This was coordination. And then came the moment investigators weren't expecting. He mentioned a second objective. Not another bombing, not another mosque, but a distraction. A way to pull attention in one direction while something else moved freely in another. That single statement reframed the arrest, because suddenly the question was no longer, did we catch someone? It became, what did we interrupt, and what is still untouched? Officials insist this arrest matters, and it does, but not for the reason being celebrated. In conflicts like this, arrests don't always end stories. Sometimes they expose how large the story really is. Because when one person talks, others become nervous. Routes change, plans adjust, silence becomes urgent. And somewhere beyond the cameras, people are listening very closely to what has already been revealed and what has not. The bomb in Maiduguri took lives. The arrest in Yobe changed the map. And the most important question now isn't who was caught, it's who realized they were almost seen. Because in this war, the loudest moment is rarely the most important one. And the real revelations never arrive with sirens. Officially, this is a success story. A suspect, identified as Ibrahim Muhammad, linked to the December 24th mosque bombing, was arrested. The announcement was brief, carefully worded, almost reassuring. One man, one name, one chain of events tied up neatly. But notice something important. This arrest didn't come from a military raid, no elite unit, no dramatic standoff. It came from a state-funded vigilante group in Yobe. Men with local knowledge, community networks, informal authority. They detained him quietly, no cameras, no press release. Only later was he handed over to Operation Hadim Kai, questioned, profiled, and moved to Maiduguri. On paper, the process looks clean, orderly, efficient, and that's exactly what should make you pause. Because wars like this rarely follow tidy scripts. Ask yourself, why did a vigilante group find him first? Why here? Why now? According to sources, the arrest wasn't random. It followed tips, conversations, local signals the military doesn't always see. This matters because it reveals something uncomfortable. Control over intelligence is shifting. For years, the fight against insurgency has been framed as military versus militants. But this arrest suggests a third force gaining influence. Community-linked actors who know the terrain, the accents, the habits. They don't patrol with armored vehicles. They blend in. And when they move faster than official forces, power quietly changes hands. The suspect's transfer to Maiduguri was presented as the final step. Case closed. File forwarded. Briefing delivered. But inside the interrogation rooms, the story didn't settle. It widened. Because Ibrahim Muhammad didn't behave like a hunted man. He behaved like someone who expected to be found. Eventually. He didn't deny involvement. He redirected attention. Not toward himself, but outward. Toward routes, toward contacts, toward decisions made above his level. That's when this stopped being a routine arrest. Because when a suspect starts mapping networks instead of defending himself, it tells investigators one thing. This man is expendable, and expendable people are rarely the architects. So no, this was not the end of the story. It was the moment the story slipped out of the official script. Because hidden inside this arrest is a shift Nigerians are not being told about. Who finds suspects now? Who controls information? And who decides what the public gets to hear? And once that balance changes, everything else follows. Let's slow this down. Because this arrest didn't just expose a suspect, it exposed a system. The vigilante group that detained Ibrahim Muhammad is funded by the Yobe state government. Salaries, logistics, political backing, but operationally, they answer to the Nigerian military. Orders flow downward, information flows upward. That's not cooperation, that's fusion. A structure where responsibility is shared, but accountability is unclear. And in a conflict like this, unclear control is dangerous. For years, the war against insurgency followed a familiar shape. Uniformed soldiers, defined command, clear chains of authority. That shape no longer holds. Now the fight has expanded into the everyday. It's fought by neighbors who recognize voices before faces, by hunters who can tell when a path has been disturbed, by market boys who notice who pays with unfamiliar currency, by informants who don't need radios to communicate. They don't wait for briefings. They don't need checkpoints. They already live inside the battlefield, and that gives them an advantage no armored vehicle can replicate. They know faces faster, they understand terrain better, they notice strangers quicker. But here's the part no official statement addresses. When people become the front line, control becomes contested. Because who gives the final order? The state that funds them? The military that directs them? Or the communities that trust them? This arrest forces that question into the open. Because if vigilantes can identify, track, and detain a bombing suspect before the military does, then intelligence has already shifted hands. And intelligence is power. But power without clear ownership creates friction. Behind the scenes, that friction is real. State authorities want results, the military wants command, communities want protection. All three want credit, all three want control. And none of them fully trust the others. This is where the conflict deepens, because insurgent warfare thrives in confusion, in blurred authority, in divided decision-making. Every new actor added to the battlefield increases speed, but also risk. One wrong accusation, one compromised informant, one decision made too quickly, and the balance collapses. That's why this arrest matters far beyond one suspect. It signals a fragile equilibrium, where victory depends not just on firepower, but on who controls information, and who decides when it is used. So when officials describe this as a win, they're only telling part of the truth. Because the real struggle exposed here is not only between the state and insurgents, it's over who truly controls security now. The state, the military, or the people? And once that question is asked, it cannot be taken back. On-screen text fades in slowly. This balance is fragile. This is where the story turns, because the most important parts of this arrest were barely mentioned. Detail number 1. Ibrahim Muhammad was not arrested with a bomb. No device, no explosives. No materials. He was arrested while observing, watching movements, tracking routines, paying attention to patterns most people ignore. That matters because it tells us the mission wasn't finished. If he were meant to strike, he would have been carrying something. Instead, he was gathering something. Information. Which means the network he belonged to was still active. It also means he may not have been essential. In operations like this, those sent to observe are often the most replaceable. If caught, they talk. If lost, they're replaced. So this arrest didn't shut down an operation. It interrupted one, and interruptions create urgency on the other side. Detail number 2 is harder to sit with. During questioning, he allegedly confessed to planting another bomb. Not planning, not scouting, already planted. Let that settle, because if that statement is accurate, then somewhere, at that moment, there was an object counting down and the public never knew. No warning. No evacuation, no announcement, just a silent race against time playing out beyond the cameras. Security teams moving fast, phones ringing, locations being checked one by one. Markets, crowded spaces, places where routine creates vulnerability. If the device was real, then the arrest didn't bring relief. It brought pressure to find something before it found people. And that kind of pressure forces decisions to be made quickly, sometimes without certainty. Which leads us to detail number 3. Officials say they expect useful information from the suspect. It sounds calm, procedural, almost reassuring. But in Nigerian security language, that phrase carries weight. It usually means this: we know there are others. We believe the structure is wider, but the map is incomplete. When authorities say useful information, they are admitting something quietly, that this case is unfinished, that the arrest opened doors they weren't fully prepared to walk through, because confessions don't always bring closure. Sometimes they widen the threat. Every name mentioned raises new questions. Every location creates a new risk. Every delay increases uncertainty. And the most unsettling part? The public only sees the headline: arrest made, suspect in custody. What they don't see are the unanswered calls, the hurried meetings, the search teams checking places they hoped didn't matter. So when officials speak carefully, it's not caution, it's containment. Because once people understand that an operation may still be unfolding, panic becomes the next enemy. And in wars like this, panic spreads faster than truth, which is why the most important details are often the ones barely mentioned. Because they tell us this story is still moving. And whatever was set in motion did not stop the moment one man was caught. This is why this story reaches far beyond one name. It's not just about Ibrahim Mohammed. It's not just about an arrest. It's about how the war is changing shape, because insurgent groups are adapting. Open confrontations have become costly. Large movements attract attention. Noise invites response, so the strategy shifts: smaller units, shorter exposure, deeper cover. The battlefield is no longer a forest or a camp. It's the places people consider safe: mosques at prayer time, markets at peak hours, buses filled with routine conversations. These spaces aren't chosen at random. They are chosen because life depends on trust, and trust is harder to defend than territory. This arrest shows us something else that matters. Firepower is no longer the decisive factor. Intelligence is. Who notices what doesn't belong? Who hears a rumor before it spreads? Who recognizes when behavior changes? That's why community-linked groups are becoming central. They don't overpower threats, they detect them. But detection comes with a cost, because the more vigilantes succeed, the deeper insurgents retreat. They blend further into daily life, they reduce communication, they rely on fewer signals, which makes everyone else a potential suspect. And that's where the danger grows. When normal life becomes the front line, certainty disappears. A stranger could be a traitor, or a messenger, or something else entirely. A familiar face could be harmless, or quietly watching. In that environment, suspicion spreads easily, and suspicion reshapes behavior. People stop sharing freely. Communities pull inward. Silence becomes protection. This is what rarely makes headlines. Security doesn't only affect those caught, it affects those watching. Parents walking children to school, vendors arranging goods, commuters choosing where to sit. Every decision now carries an unspoken calculation. Is this place safe? Is this person known? Is it worth speaking up? And the hardest part? There are no clear answers. Because when trust becomes the battlefield, every choice has consequences. Who do you suspect without accusing the innocent? Who do you protect without creating blind spots? Who do you report without risking retaliation or error? These questions don't belong to soldiers alone anymore. They belong to civilians, to communities, to people just trying to live ordinary lives in a conflict that refuses to stay contained. That's why this arrest matters. It marks a point where the fight moves fully into everyday spaces, where victory is measured not by territory taken, but by harm prevented, often quietly, often unseen. And in that kind of war, the headline is never the full story. Because the real impact is felt long after the cameras move on. In how people look at each other, in what they choose to say, and in what they decide to keep to themselves. And once that shift happens, there is no easy way back. Yes, a suspect has been arrested. That much is true. A name was released, a face briefly shown, a statement issued. For a moment, it feels like progress. Like something solid has been achieved. But wars like this don't end with handcuffs. They pause, they adjust, they wait. Because the real question Nigerians should be asking is not about the man already in custody. It's about the ones who aren't. How many more like him are still watching? Not from hiding places, but from ordinary positions. Standing in line, sitting nearby, moving with purpose that looks like routine. How many are listening without asking questions? Learning schedules, memorizing habits, blending so completely they never trigger concern. This arrest reminds us of something unsettling. Threats don't always announce themselves. They don't always rush. They don't always carry anything suspicious. Sometimes they wait. They learn the rhythm of a place until they become part of it. They learn how people greet each other, when crowds gather, when attention drops, and by the time they matter, they already belong. That's what makes this moment important. Not because of what has been stopped, but because of what may still be unfolding quietly. Somewhere, conversations have changed, routes have shifted, silence has become intentional, and someone, somewhere is paying attention to how this arrest was handled. Who spoke, who didn't, who moved fast, who hesitated, because every response teaches the other side something. In conflicts like this, learning is continuous, and the most effective participants are rarely the loudest ones. They don't rush toward attention. They let attention pass over them. They survive by being unremarkable. Which brings us to the hardest truth of all. In today's war, the most dangerous weapon is no longer the bomb. It's the man nobody notices. The one who looks familiar enough to be ignored. The one who stands close enough to hear everything. The one who leaves no mark until the moment arrives. That is the threat this story points toward. Not fear but awareness, because security now depends as much on observation as it does on force. On asking quiet questions, on trusting carefully, on staying informed without spreading panic. The street looks calm tonight, lights still glow, life continues. But beneath that calm is a lesson this arrest has revealed. The war has learned how to hide. And the next revelation will not arrive with noise. It will arrive quietly, just like the last one. Stay alert, stay informed, subscribe for deeper explanations behind Nigeria's biggest stories.